Okay, we are recording. So, welcome everybody. Good morning. Welcome to this look ahead at the policy landscape over the next year. It's not a normal policy year. DfE took 18 months to release its school's white paper last week. We'll get into a little bit of that through the session. It's a year longer than we typically expect a new government coming in from opposition to publish their kind of thesis really around how they want the education system that they've inherited to work moving forwards. So a lot of detail in that, a lot of challenge, a lot of opportunity in there as well, and we'll have a look at those. We are seeing some early stages, I would say, of alignment between various previously maybe disparate areas of policy. So growth policy, skills reform, education reform, and the thing for employers is the expectations and the opportunities in that are therefore shifting. So what we're not going to do in this session is debate the individual merits of those policy decisions and interventions that have been taken, but we will explore the direction of the travel and what it means for employers in terms of talent, outreach, inclusion over the next 12 to 18 months. So as I say, several of these policy streams are converging around this objective, this central objective of growth and participation. We have a 10-year industrial strategy signalling priority sectors, long-term investment direction. We have Skills England shaping how the skills system responds to those labour market changes. And we now have the school's white paper focused heavily on inclusion and SEND reform. We've got a clearer national expectation around the 2 weeks worth of work experience for every young person, and we'll talk a bit about that this morning too, how that fits into the picture. And we have the active reform of apprenticeship funding and delivery, and a clear tilt towards apprenticeships for younger people. And that was echoed actually by Jackie Smith yesterday at an event yesterday when she talked specifically around a pivot. No longer just a shift, but a pivot towards young people. And we'll look at some of the levers that the government are using to try and achieve that. This is part of a wider shift towards increasing workforce and education participation. What's shown here is the NEET rates. So those young people that have dropped out of the system post 16. And we know, you don't need me to tell you, that 13.8% of young people not being in meaningful employment and sustained employment is a bit of a crisis in the country, to be honest, and it is a lag on the growth that the government want to see. So it represents an economic risk and a policy urgency. And here at the Central London Careers Hub, we are very passionate about ensuring that employers are part of that conversation and part of that solution moving forwards. Now, before we move into those specific reforms, I think it's important to understand the wider economic context. So there's a clear growth ambition at the centre of current policy, and it is often said it's the organising principle of government, but talent supply is a limiting factor in any growth plan. So we can look at capital and infrastructure, technology, incentives, but without talent, it all kind of crumbles away. So public finances are going to limit the scale of direct state interventions here. And we can't just spend our way out of this participation gap. We're going to have to look to institutions and employers to play a really key role in local communities. And the questions we need to ask are: how early are young people exposed to sectors? How effectively are those transitions managed from school to further education or higher education, apprenticeships, employment? How inclusive are those pathways? How connected are local employers to their local education systems? And these are now central economic questions. So if growth ambition is high and public capacity is constrained, the system just becomes more dependent on employer education partnerships in local areas leading the way. So when we talk about work experience, SEND reform, apprenticeship redesign, they're not just policy tweaks, they're mechanisms designed to improve the talent supply and widen that participation and ideally reduce that friction in the transition into work. So getting into some of the key levers that the government have pulled through in their white paper, the context that they're operating in and the challenges they're trying to address here are pupils with SEND have a significantly wider attainment gap compared to other pupils. It's even wider than pupils eligible for free school meals. And what we can say here is that additional needs are therefore associated with weaker academic outcomes. And I don't think anybody should just accept that that's something to settle for. That doesn't mean that there's lower potential in those groups of young people. And the government's trying to make the case here that the current system, the current model is just struggling to provide the support required. It's in the context of the number of young people that have been formally identified as requiring additional support through an EHCP has ballooned over the last 10 years. And these trends have persisted. If transitions into employment, therefore, rely purely on academic performance, then what we're saying is a significant and growing cohort is at risk of weaker progression. SEND reform is often framed in terms of the costs and the numbers, and we'll look a bit at that. The costs are significant, but the cost of just accepting that a material shrinkage of the wider talent pool is probably greater in the long run, beyond just the moral case of doing this. So looking at some of the key measures that have been brought through. So the national inclusion standards have been brought through to reduce the variation in SEND practice between local areas. So the idea being that they will establish a clear national baseline for what mainstream support looks like. Things like adaptive teaching, inclusive curriculum design, evidence-based interventions. They'll be backed by a digital library of guidance and an expert national panel that is due to be appointed. And the aim here is to end this postcode lottery and make the system less adversarial for families by clarifying what every school must provide as part of a universal offer for SEND. We know that demand for EHCPs has risen year on year, and the system has frankly struggled to keep pace with that. Local authorities have been carrying significant high needs deficits, and nationally that is reaching unsustainable levels. So in response, what the government is doing in the short term is writing off 90% of those historic SEND deficits, but only for councils whose reform plans around SEND are signed off by the Department for Education. So at the same time, the process itself is being redesigned. So the idea is that there'll be a national template, it will be tied to national specialist provision packages, clearer, more specific wording, and stronger multi-agency input earlier. Statutory assessments will focus on whether a child genuinely needs specialist provision, not on restating levels needs that should be manageable through tier 1 or tier 2 support in a mainstream setting. There is a clear shift here from government, and Bridget Phillips, and the Education Secretary, has made this very clear that the preference for government is that learners with SEND are learn and taught with their peers in mainstream settings wherever possible. So meeting SEND needs to become a core function of every school and not some optional specialism, some added extra. So mainstream capacity is being strengthened through mandatory SEND and inclusion training for all staff. That'll begin from this year. There's an expectation there'll be an inclusion base within every secondary school. And there's a new inclusive mainstream fund that they're putting £1.6 billion into, requiring schools to publish their inclusion strategy. There's going to be clearer accountability around how those mainstream adjustments are implemented. So the intent here is to reduce unnecessary escalation to EHCP by improving the earlier intervention and the quality of routine classroom support. Transitions at 16 and 18 are some of the most fragile points in the SEND system, and anybody who's worked in this system will know that. The white paper explicitly attempts to strengthen the expectation around the transition planning, and I've got some data on the next slide to show you about that. And it's trying to look at vocational and employment aligned routes such as supported internships, and reaffirms its commitment to those. So there is an alignment here with the wider labour market picture. The government, in lots of areas, and we'll come on to some of those later, wants improvements in destinations, not just provision. So the scrutiny here is shifting to whether SEND support actually leads to sustained education pathways, training, employment, and post-16 coherence is being supported here by large-scale expansion of specialist places, 50,000 over 4 years. So it's not saying that, right, specialist places are now no longer that they are actually strengthening that, but actually there's more robust processes earlier on in that learner journey to ascertain which environment is going to be best suited for them. They've also looked at, and I don't know a huge amount about this yet, but they've looked at improving access to health professionals via the Experts at Hand programme. The idea of that is to guarantee schools more consistent specialist input. So those are the key things that came out. And when we look at our data here that we hold at the Central London Hub, this is from our Future Skills questionnaire, we can see that there are disparities, not just in academic attainment, but in careers provision for young people with SEND as well. Career readiness being at 64 is lower than the wider school population. 27% of learners feeling that they've got the requisite essential skills for their next pathway is significantly lower, and less than half of our learners with SEND are engaging in career planning beyond their school life. So there is clear work to do here, not just in terms of academic attainment, but in terms of the career planning and career provision as well. Apologies for this terrible screenshot, it's very blurry, but it's essentially an Ofsted, a screenshot of an Ofsted, one of the Ofsted grading areas. And it's been described to me that inclusion will become a key golden thread through Ofsted's reporting. They're moving away, and this happened last year, but it's really going to be felt in our schools this year, away from that old 4-grade model, replacing it with this 5-point grading scale ranging from exceptional down to urgent improvement. And the idea here is to add some more nuance into school performance. So that traditional single word overall effectiveness judgment disappears, and schools will receive their report card breaking down performance across these evaluation areas, each with its own grade and narrative around it. And the idea of this is there's been long-standing concerns that the old single headline grade just oversimplifies quite a complex system and does create disproportionate consequences. So the new framework tries to elevate inclusion to this standalone judgment area for the first time, but it also merges through curriculum and teaching and so on. And the idea there is that high quality teaching should be linked to a curriculum preparing learners for the real world. So because this new framework explicitly values inclusion, wider experiences, enrichment, curriculum relevance, and of course learner outcomes and destinations, all of these things are strengthened by employer engagement. And we've done some work here at the Careers Hub to look at every area of the Ofsted framework, and there's not a single one of these grading areas that can't be supported by really effective employer partnerships and really effective careers provision in the round. So there is some alignment going on here. The curriculum and assessment review completed late last year, so we will expect this to come through in the new academic year, probably for 27-28 onwards, start to see that merge. And the curriculum, essentially, the words used here were evolution, not revolution. There was consensus around some of the Gove reforms back in the early 2010s, that things like literacy rates and maths rates and so on went up, phonics rates improved, but there was also a sense that the academicization, if you like, of some of those curriculum subjects had some weird outcomes to them. So one example used is around the IT curriculum. The old information communication technology GCSE became computer science, and what we saw was a real drop off of GCSE age girls taking that GCSE, and I don't think that was the intention of that particular area of the policy, but that was one of the weird outcomes that we saw. So there is a shift away from this overly academic exam heavy model towards something a bit more applied, a bit more skills based, and the idea being that it's aligned with economic priority. So there's a repositioning around digital literacy, green and technological competency, foundational skills like oracy and teamwork and problem solving, and more experiential project-based learning. So there's a recognition that the labour market is changing way faster than the curriculum can keep up, and this system is trying to close that gap. So on the assessment side, nothing changes overnight here, but the direction of travel is quite clear. Less reliance on single endpoint exams, more use of digital assessment, gradual moves towards portfolios, competency evidence beyond just exams. So as the curriculum becomes more applied, I think the system will look to employers for more authenticity. We'll move away slowly from kind of talks and tours, and more towards things like projects and challenges and briefs and experiences that map directly onto curriculum outcomes. And I think employers involved in the education system and partnered with local education institutions should expect over the coming years, as part of this curriculum review, to be active supporters and co-designers of some of those curriculum content pieces. So work experience, industry engagement, models like EqualX that I'll come on to are now becoming structurally quite relevant to the mainstream and core delivery of what schools are. So just getting into that, we've circled around work experience a bit here. The work experience guarantee first trailed in the Labour manifesto in 2024. We've got little pockets of more information in various white papers and so on. It was referenced again in the schools white paper last week with a recommitment to careers hubs, which was great news for me and my team. But the work experience guarantee is, to make it very, very simple, every learner should have at least a minimum of 2 weeks worth of experiences by the time they leave school, so by the end of year 11. Now that doesn't mean it's got to be 2 consecutive weeks or 5 consecutive days. There is a lot of flexibility, and I think the key word in this all is flexibility. Employers have been telling us for years now, we wish there was more flexibility in the system. 1 week in June for year 10 just doesn't quite work for us. We get inundated with these requests. We'd love to work with schools on something that's a bit more year-round, a bit more sustained engagement, and a little less resource intensive for both the schools and the employers. So as we know, the curriculum being redesigned around these more technical skills, these more vocational sort of routes, I think employers have a huge role to play. There's a real benefit here for employers, I think, around supporting a school with their wider development goals, not seeing work experience as this standalone thing that we do once a year, but seeing it as a key lever, actually, something that can be enriching to the curriculum and supportive and of the curriculum, making that learning more relevant to learners. Now, this Careers and Enterprise Company, the national body for careers education in England, have produced a way of doing this, a framework for this delivery, and essentially it is built on learning outcomes, shared learning outcomes between employers, educators, learners, even parents. And I think parents are often the forgotten stakeholder in all of this. I think parents absolutely need to be communicated to around this and why schools are making this investment into their learners and what the benefits of really sustained progressive work experience models can do. But essentially we follow 3 phases. And we look at, in the early phase, sort of introductory activities, so inspirational, aspirational, kind of sector opening activities, blending as the learner moves through their school career into a bit more investigative and exploratory activity, and all the while becoming more relevant to their interests and their needs, building on that prior learning. I've mentioned the learning outcomes. I think it's always been slightly odd to me that careers experiences are some of the only things that we do in schools that students don't actively prepare for necessarily. There's no learning objective underpinning it, and they're not asked to reflect on what they've learned afterwards. Now, that's not in every school. I know lots of schools do that, but it isn't a sort of standardized thing until now. So these learning outcomes have been shared with every institution, and we're working with employers all the time to understand these learning outcomes and what the benefit is for the employers who are engaging with these learners and through their education outreach. And I showed this one, so anybody who was on the call yesterday, apologies for showing the same slide again, but I showed this one yesterday. This is just a selection of different activities that we do or can be done between employers and educators. So nothing here is particularly revolutionary. All of these things are fairly straightforward and simple to deliver, but the revolutionary part of these is done in a sustained, partnership focused, co-designed way between employers and educators. That's the revolutionary bit. That's what's going to set us up for success over the next decade. Employer standards are also a careers and enterprise company product. Everything that we do here is completely free, including the self-assessment for employer standards. So I'd really encourage anybody thinking about engaging in this education space. It's really quite exciting, and we'll come on to some of the exciting things later on, but I'd encourage them to use the employer standard self-assessment as a first step to looking at where you might want to do that. So back to the policy looking forward then. So Skills England are growing in stature. They've been positioned by ministers as the single authoritative voice on England's skills needs. The idea is that the organisation will connect the national growth ambition to what providers actually teach and what employers actually need. So they're very data driven. They're looking at sort of horizon scanning the future demand, correcting mismatches between courses and jobs, and so on. So at the sort of parliamentary level, the remit is to bring together businesses, providers, unions, regional government to create a system that produces this sort of highly trained workforce. So a key change in late last year was this kind of machinery of government move that put apprenticeships and adult FE and Skills England into the DWP away from the DFE. And there's a joint ministerial brief across DWP and DFE now. Jackie Smith, the skills minister, sits across both departments. And the idea behind that was to bind skills policy tightly to sort of employment and participation outcomes. So we have seen some ministerial priorities as they've come through around Skills England. There were two letters to the Joint Chief Executives. In June 25, the Education Secretary asked Skills England to be the system integrator, identifying gaps, aligning offers across government and co-designing with industry and regional partners. And in just October, at the end of last year, the Work and Pension Secretary reinforced the growth mission. They asked Skills England to respond to employers' needs, expand foundation and shorter apprenticeships, support ambitions for higher participation in level 4 study by age 25, level 4 and beyond study by age 25, and look at how Skills England's analytics can inform that industrial planning that the country does. So, together, I would say these letters frame this year as the year where skills policy becomes operationalised around these growth sectors. We've had a lot of white papers and a lot of briefings and a lot of letters, and I think this will be where the rubber hits the road and we start to see some key delivery levers come through. So one of the key ones amongst those is the local skills improvement plan refresh that is due for this year. That will cover the period 26 to 29. And there'll be an updated governance model there. So there'll be joint ownership now between the employer representative bodies and the strategic authorities. We at the Careers Hub are supporting that process in Central London through Central London Forward, the employer representative body, and we are co-funded by the GLA. So we're well placed with the data that we hold to support that process. Now, on sort of products and insight and what people can use Skills England for, they are producing sector analyses, and some of those are on the website already, especially around the priority sectors outlined by the industrial strategy. Priority skills assessments and local dashboards to look at those. I'd really encourage colleagues to go and look at those. And the aim here is about shaping provision where the shortages are kind of acute. And what is the essay question here is, what is the line of sight for learners into high value jobs in their area? So there have been several announcements on apprenticeship reform, so faster updates, shorter courses, pathway to 50,000 extra starts. And the idea for that is to create the delivery space for Skills England to channel those demand signals into new apprenticeship products like modular courses and so on. So I expect close cooperation on the growth and skills levy shift and on sort of early career pipelines in those priority sectors. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. These are just the missions, the early missions that they've set out for themselves, very data heavy. I want to talk a little bit about post-16 reform. I've only got time to a couple of bits here. There was a huge, heavy white paper that came through a little while ago. So the first one here is around level 2 transitions. So A levels, T levels, and proposed V levels. So alongside these A levels and T levels, which I'm sure we all know about, there was a government consultation in October on this third vocational route, V levels. And the idea of this is to create smaller, stackable vocational certificates at level 3. And the purpose there is to provide a vocational alternative that can be combined to match local sector demand and keeping that clear line of sight to skilled employment. So the consultation on this closed in January, and I do anticipate the outcomes of that shaping the 26-27 offers at level 2. The next phase of level 3 approvals is planned for the 2026 cycle, and there will be sector by sector notes to understand what routes will see new qualifications. So just on level 2, there are sort of 2 clear pathways emerging here. So one is the further study pathway, a 1-year foundation certificate to prepare students for progression to A, T or V levels, and an occupational pathway, which is a 2-year occupational certificate intended for skilled level 2 employment or progression. There will be a phased rollout of that across this and next year with purpose-led groupings. We're waiting for the volume expectations there. And most large-scale funding removals will sit beyond this academic year. It will come next year, but curriculum leads, we're telling, should already be sequencing that move. So there have been quite a lot of changes to apprenticeships over the last few months even. So the big headline at the moment is the reduction in the approval timeline for updated standards and short courses from 18 months down to as little as 3 months. And the idea is that there should be a rapid response to major projects, skills needs. So when you look at things like the Heathrow runway expansion, potentially the Gatwick expansion, Sidewell C, so on, these major capital investment projects, historically apprenticeship updates took over a year to implement, and the idea is we can move quicker to get those through via Skills England. But at the same time, the funding rules have changed quite significantly, which I think reflect that fiscal constraint we mentioned earlier. And there is a clear desire to prioritise early career routes. So specific changes, the approval time. The idea of this is that a new apprenticeship module can be approved in a single quarter. That means training can match the labour market needs more effectively, and things like clean energy, large infrastructure, advanced manufacturing projects, and so on. The idea is they can tap into a more skilled market of labour earlier. And these are sitting alongside short modular courses. So modular training options where a full apprenticeship might be overkill, might be too long, too costly, too slow. The idea is that this will support project-based hiring where specific competencies are needed quite urgently, or project-based training. We're seeing foundation apprenticeships come through, so structured entry-level routes designed for young people that are early in their labour market journey. And this is about broadening access and hitting that participation mission. And there is a shorter minimum duration overall. So apprenticeships can now be completed where previously it was 12 months. That will now come down to 8 months. So where a learner, there are some caveats. Where a learner has substantial prior learning, apprenticeships no longer need to last that full year. So that, combined with the modular updates, the idea is it materially speeds up the progression in those priority sectors. And we're expecting some endpoint assessment flexibility to come through as well. So some streamlining of that, and Skills England are looking at this very carefully. Elimination of duplicate assessments, flexibility for providers to deliver aspects of that assessment. The idea, fewer bottlenecks, faster completions, and more proportionate assessment for learners. Funding has to come into this. The levy, the growth and skills levy, as it is now called, that window to spend that money has halved. It will go from 24 months to 12 months. And the expectation is that this will reshape some of that employer behaviour. So that fund will now essentially expire twice as fast, which will force employers into kind of monthly levy management. So rather than sort of annual reviews of the levy, that utilisation is going to have to happen in real time. At the same time as that, the co-investment percent rises from 5% to 25% through these reforms. So for employers who exhaust those levy funds, or for non-levy paying businesses, training actually becomes 5 times more expensive through these measures. And the idea is that this will push earlier starts, more level 2 or 3 early career programs, and fewer of the expensive mid-career level 7 programs, despite organisations like the AELP and others who are strong advocates of sort of those apprenticeships programs and the sort of career mobility they offer later in careers. The government 10% top up has been removed, so reducing that real value of the levy for large employers. The idea is it will increase the incentive to use that levy actively and avoid those expiries. The rebrand of the levy, the move to the growth and skills levy, it signals a future flexibility, but I think this year we will see tighter utilisation, faster expiry being the things to watch, not looser rules in particular. I think that will come, but I think this year will be a consolidation year around apprenticeships. The government is backing the reform with about £700 million to meet that target it set itself of 50,000 more apprenticeships in the system. Okay. This is all linked to this modern industrial strategy, which came out last year, and we expect to gather pace this year. So 10-year plan to increase the business investment and provide sort of policy predictability for the long term. So there are sector plans that came with this, and there is an expectation there will be a quarterly update delivered to, I think it's the Business and Trade Committee in Parliament, about progress on some of the KPIs around job growth and so on. And the idea is that there should be a rhythm of evidence that will attract investors into the country. The sectors that are prioritised are advanced manufacturing, clean energy, creative industries, defence, digital technology, financial services, life sciences, and professional and business services. And the idea of this is that they were chosen for their high value add and potential to drive these regional clusters of jobs. The Business and Trade Committee, as I mentioned, has set out certain tests that they want the government to adhere to. So clear missions around job creation, productivity, investment, and so on. And that will invite regular scrutiny. And the idea is that it's sort of linked in a way to the thinking around the Ofsted model. It's looking at destinations and pipeline-based evidence of outcome rather than inputs. Zooming along here because I'm conscious of time. So we get asked a lot of questions about the National Youth Guarantee. The Central London Careers Hub are not one of the areas selected for the first wave of guaranteed job support, but there is an 820 million government package creating 350,000 new workplace or training opportunities for young people in sectors like construction and health and social care and hospitality. So the idea here is that young people on universal credit will receive enhanced work search support and referrals into 6 pathways. So work experience, apprenticeships, wider training, learning, or workplace training with a guaranteed interview. There will be 55,000 6-month paid jobs for long-term unemployed people between 18 and 21, fully paid for in terms of wages by the government. And that will begin rollout in some high need regions from spring, so relatively soon. And those areas are Birmingham, Greater Manchester, Hertfordshire and Essex, East Midlands and Central and East Scotland, South West and South East Wales. So we're hoping that in London for sort of wave 2 of this programme, depending on all being well, later on in the year, we'll start to see that come through in London too. Okay. So in terms of support we offer here at the Careers Hub, the EqualX Employer Charter is our main vehicle for employers seeking to engage in all of this and understand more about how industry policy aligns with education policy, how employers can really stay ahead of the curve of those reforms that are coming through and plan their outreach and their early career routes accordingly. We have over 40 now employers across London, ranging from small businesses, small digital marketing agencies and so on, all the way up to international organisations like Covey, who are a huge international engineering consultancy. So whatever the type of business and whatever the size of business, the Central London Careers Hub can help engage in your future talent pipelines, ensuring that it is aligned to what is a fast moving and quite complex policy space. I will share these slides, again, conscious of time, so I'm going to whiz through here, but essentially the commitment is 1 day a year of EqualX aligned activity with local youngsters, teaching them all about the sector and all the great things that you can offer in your industry. And in return, you will be able to display our lovely Chartered Employer logo, which signals alignment to this government priority around participation and growth. And finally, I'll include this on the follow-up email at the end of the week with a recording to this session and the PDF of the slides. This is a report released by Reading Partnership quite recently, looking at those key routes after post-18 and how that, and providing real kind of suggestions on and measures on how each of those routes can be strengthened. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. But for now, that is it from me. I'm happy to stay on and take any questions or comments. Is there any from the room?
No, I don't think so at this stage. I think I'm relatively, well, although I'm a Hertfordshire Cornerstone chair, so
Great.
I do that in Hertfordshire. So I've got, some of that was very relevant because I know about the youth guarantee and all that kind of thing. So, but I'm quite new to the Central London hub, so I've been dealing with Jamie.
Great. Yeah.
And obviously, the way that I work is very much strategically around project. Where I've got a project, then I can support in that area.
Of course.
I can't always consistently, so I'm only as good as I've got a project there long enough.
Yeah. Are you in the built environment by?
Yes. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Wilmot Dixon. So.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Great. We come up against this a lot. I'm sure you'll know. This is one of the things that social value sort of procurement notices we're looking at the moment in terms of how does it take into account the hiring, for example, of local apprentices. Well, what do they do when that project finishes and the next one's 30 miles away? So there are issues with projection of timelines of projects and so on. And I think a more unified system, one with sort of shared job creation, skills, modular courses. I don't think any of these things are a silver bullet to those issues, but I think that they can support with local economies and job creation in local economies at least. So it will be interesting to see how that all plays out. But yeah, looking forward to working with you specifically on what we can do for some of your Central London projects.
Super, thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for a really good presentation. It was really helpful this morning and really good to hear, as you were just saying, about the modular training and the apprenticeships as well. I think for major projects, that's a game changer. So yeah, really helpful to understand that this morning. So just thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kelly. And yeah, great to hear that, because yeah, I've been hearing that from employers for years is, why would I do an apprenticeship or put apprenticeships on? It's such an outlay of investment. And actually for these specific projects have very specific skills needs, it can really change the game, as you say. So great feedback. Thank you. Great. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll close it there. As I say, the recording will be on YouTube later this week, so you can see yourself back. But thanks very much, and have a great rest of your National Careers Week.
Bye-bye.
Thanks ever so much. Thank you.
Thank you.